Hall & Wilcox acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands on which this podcast is recorded. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and to all First Nations people joining us today.
Hello and welcome to the fifth and final episode in our Beyond Compliance Leading Workplaces Through Change podcast series, where we've been exploring the key issues facing workplace leaders in an increasingly complex environment. Across this series, we've covered restructures and redundancies, psychosocial hazards, complaints, claims, and leading through transformation and digital disruption. In this final episode, we're shifting from risk to resilience to focus on what actually drives performance today, beyond KPIs, and what great leadership looks like. I'm Faye Calderoni, a partner in our employment team at Hall & Wilcox, and I'm your host for this series. For this episode, I am delighted to be joined by two of the best leaders I know, our Chief Executive Partner, Graydon Dowd, and our National Practice Group Leader in the employment team, Alison Baker. Welcome, Graydon and Alison.
Thanks, Faye.
Hi.
So, Graydon, I might kick off with you. We've spent this series unpacking a range of risks, legal, technological, cultural, reputational issues employers are navigating or businesses are navigating. It's clear that leaders are now operating in an increasingly complex geopolitical and economic environment, while at the same time they're trying to navigate rapid and continuous workplace change. From your perspective, what's fundamentally changed about leadership expectations in today's environment? And a handy reference guide about how long you've been leading would be good for our listeners, but you don't need to reveal your age.
Thanks, Faye. Yes, I've been the Chief Executive Partner of Hall & Wilcox now coming up to 2 years, and we had about a year of transition between Tony McVean, the previous Managing Partner, and myself, so roughly 3 years getting used to and being in this role. And before that, I've led teams for about 20 years, going back to my previous firm as well. I think that leaders need to be across more dimensions, which perhaps means they need to have a more diverse skill set. So not only are they required and expected to develop and implement the strategic direction for the organisation, they also need to understand how the world is changing and how people respond differently to that change. They also need to articulate the destination the organisation wishes to reach and ensure that everyone is motivated and inspired to help realise that destination. I think some people require more support and guidance, even empathy in some instances, whereas other people will be more comfortable adapting to what is required. I think the key is to ensure everyone is clear about what their role is and how they can have maximum impact in that role. And leaders need to create an environment where people can achieve their full potential and flourish.
So true. And that's one thing I think we've done really well in terms of defining the purpose and vision for the firm and maintaining that fantastic culture that we've built even over the years. We've grown so rapidly, but when you have that purpose and you have that vision and that inspiring and compassionate leadership, it really does make a huge difference, which I suppose is a good pivot into psychosocial safety, which is a major focus and one that I'm going to ask you a question about, Alison. We can't seem to turn on the TV or pick up a newspaper or, more to the point, our phones, given the way things have evolved, without reading about it. And there's no doubt these claims are trending in the workplaces of our clients across Australia and, of course, our desks as employment lawyers. But how do leaders practically balance this ever-increasing risk of managing these psychosocial hazards, risks and complaints while still holding people accountable for high performance, which we need in the current economic environment?
Yeah, thanks, Faye. You're absolutely right. It is such a hot topic at the moment. I think the concept of psychological safety, it's interesting because it's not new. I would say employers always had obligations to ensure that they weren't putting the psychological safety of their employees at risk. But there's definitely been a shift in the last sort of 12 to 24 months from a regulatory perspective, where legislation's been changed, codes have been introduced, and that was leading into the last year or so, and now workplaces have really picked it up. They know there are these additional expectations on them. And so you're right, we are just inundated with requests for advice on this topic. And just this morning, I was talking to a client who has asked if we can come and deliver senior leadership training on concepts around psychological safety and how to manage performance and workplace behaviour, and just also aligning it with their policies as well, because I think all of that is so important. But we all need to recognise as well that psychological safety and a high performing team are not mutually exclusive. You don't have to, it doesn't make sense to have a psychologically safe environment, but people who aren't performing, leaders have to be equipped to manage performance issues. They just need to do it in the right way, with being aware of people's psychological safety as they're doing it. And I think being really clear with people around what's expected of them and required is so important. I think that was what Graydon was saying before. People having clarity in their roles and what they're expected to do will really help. And then if people are not meeting those expectations, you need to be making sure you're giving really regular and specific feedback to people. And I think specifics are key. It has to be contextualized for people so that they understand it and they can take steps to improve. If you just give really general feedback, that can often confuse people. And ambiguity then leads to concern and fear. And what are we talking about? Impact on psychological safety. So being really specific and consistent with feedback, I think, is important, and explaining why people need to be performing at a high level and why it's important, and focusing on their career development and what that means for them. I think taking them on a journey will help. It's not an expectation, though, of perfection, and the legislation doesn't require perfection around these things. It's all reasonably practicable steps, and it's inevitable that people will raise this as they're going through performance management processes, but you just need to make sure you've been clear and specific and well documented, I think, and then that puts you in the best position to try and address these issues.
I think that's probably the most refreshing analysis of psychosocial safety I've ever heard. This is unprompted, unscripted, as this whole podcast has been, and more importantly, empowering. The way you broke that down and that analysis that psychosocial safety and high performance are not mutually exclusive, and how you empower people to thrive in the workplace, it just demystifies what I think so many leaders are grappling with at an intellectual level without really looking at practically how do we empower people, how do we ensure dignity and compassion to enable them to thrive in their roles. And that's, I'm going to get the transcript of that and I'm going to repeat it in presentations for years to come, I expect. Graydon, pivoting now to constant change and our favourite topic, AI, and workforce expectations around it, the ongoing disruption that we're facing around tech advancement. What are you seeing when it comes to leadership and team fatigue around that? And how do we sustain high performance and ensure people aren't fearful as we navigate this change?
Well, thanks, Faye. And just to pick up Alison's point, I think you can have sustainable high performance without burnout. They're also not mutually exclusive. So the workplace is less conventional and much more complex now than what it was, say, 20 years ago. And the demands on leaders and everyone in the organisation as a result are greater than before. And obviously this can create fatigue, confusion, and other things like anxiety within the workplace, which could give rise to problems. So as to fatigue, I think focus needs to be on ensuring everyone's role is well articulated and properly understood. But then behind that, efficiency and ensuring everyone is having impact are key, because that is what sustains performance. And then behind that again, there needs to be an appropriate an effective support mechanism or system in place, and most importantly, a culture within the organisation that will identify when people are struggling. I think that will then help create the necessary resilience within the workforce. And also people need to be comfortable to raise any concerns. And I think that's absolutely vital in any good, flourishing working environment. Burnout can arise where people are working too hard or where the pressures of work are greater than what the person can reasonably cope with. And I think leaders in those situations need to not only recognise this, but also swing into action very quickly to fix it when it manifests itself.
So true. The most, not as a pitch for the book, but you've just turned my mind to it, that the most valuable insights gained from in writing Broken to Safe were that burnout isn't just about overwork, and you can have people working very long hours, which is obviously in the long term not ideal or sustainable always, but if they're doing purposeful work and they feel safe and that they're performing in an environment, they're less likely to burn out than people that are in an environment where they're fearful, where they don't trust their leaders, where they think their employment is at risk, where they're blamed, where they're not scared to own up to mistakes. So that burnout piece, I think we often associate it with long hours and hard work, but that positive workplace culture and safety is actually key to avoiding it, and therefore not necessarily a detractor from high performance. So very, very good insights there, Graydon. Al, bringing this back to what we navigate as employment lawyers and with ongoing transformation and disruption, we know and we're hearing in mainstream media and from behind the scenes with our clients that jobs are changing and organisations are restructuring. Change is inevitable in the face of digital disruption and the world we're navigating. How do you think that leaders can work through these changes whilst maintaining positive workplace cultures, and that so that they're not permeated by fear?
Yeah, you're absolutely right that this is something that is dominating workplaces. And as Graydon said, the work environment is more complex now than it ever has been before. And I think it's really hard to predict what's going to happen in 6 months' time, a year, 5 years' time. We just don't know. And so that creates uncertainty and anxiety for people. But I think you just can't communicate enough, and you need to communicate in different ways. So there's a time and a place for your sort of town hall type meeting where you have the most senior person in the organisation talk to the workplace about if there's big changes on the horizon, but then also having weekly meetings set or other ways, electronic communications, just different ways, cadences, so that people know there's communication coming. Because I think if you can take people on the journey with you so that they know what may be coming in the future and also why it's happening, so that they don't get in their own heads and start assessing why something might be happening. Knowledge is really key to this. And we know as employment lawyers, under legislation, it's built in. If there's major change coming, you need to consult with your staff. And I think we used to always focus on if there was an award or an enterprise agreement that had consultation obligations, you needed to make sure you met those. Now with psychological safety, we're also turning to the consultation requirements under work health and safety laws. Previously, you might have looked at that consultation if it was a change in machinery or a safety practice or something that could have physical implications in the workplace. Now I think we're like, no, you've got consultation obligations under several different sources. And so there's the legal requirement to consult. And I've always found that employers who've met their legal obligations well through consultation have had a better outcome with their staff, because inevitably they've been forced through the legislative obligations to be transparent about what's happening and why it might impact on people. So I think use your legislative obligations as a guide, and of course we all want to comply with those, but then get people involved, allow people the ability to provide feedback. You don't always have to accept what they say, but at least if you've given them the opportunity to have a voice, you can then respond to that and in a considered way, and people have a better understanding of what's happening. So I think transparency as best you can. If you don't know the answer, be honest about the fact that you don't know the answer, and then it's authentic and people feel like they can raise concerns and are less likely to create a different scenario in their own mind and run away with that, I think. And that if they talk to somebody else, it can fester and then that can impact on culture.
That's absolutely right. I think it's a one circumstance where we can say silence is absolutely not golden. And if you don't talk to your people, they're going to make things up, or they're going to fear the worst, right? And communicate the worst in corridors and water coolers amongst themselves. So the more you can say, I think, and more transparent and authentic you can be, the better. And that doesn't mean perfection, like you said earlier. It doesn't mean giving them all the answers, because you won't have all the answers and you might not be able to provide complete reassurance, but you're absolutely right. If you say nothing, they will assume the worst, and that is where the fear comes in. So that's great, Al. Okay, coming back to Graydon, bring it down to what leaders can do every day from a practical point of view. What practical habits or behaviours consistently drive high performance across teams in the context of everything we've been talking about today?
Sure, Faye, and I think driving high performance is virtually what every organisation wants to try and achieve or strive to achieve. And I think it comes back down to what high performance means or how it is derived. And it occurs where there is a high level of engagement and also a willingness to work at one's highest potential. And that occurs where motivation levels are high, and this can be stimulated by or through a range of factors. And again, people are different, and leaders need to recognise this and ensure people are empowered to play to their strengths. So recognising their strengths, articulating their strengths, then ultimately devising a role description or a role itself which plays towards those strengths will be a very good starting point. And just bear in mind that some people, they relish the intellectual challenge. They're all different. Some have a competitive spirit that motivates them to succeed, where others don't necessarily have that same spirit. And some strive for a sense of achievement. That's the pinnacle of their performance. And there needs to be a reward and recognition system that is aligned to high performance, and also a culture of sharing and celebrating successes. And those really important attributes like teamwork and collaboration and creating a sense of belonging are also key attributes that leaders must foster in order to ensure that high performance is derived.
Fantastic, Graydon. I think that sort of brings us to a bit sad to say it, our final question for the series. And I'm going to let you both have the last word for our listeners. So your final and most insightful takeaway on how people can effectively lead safe and have high-performing teams in today's workplace. And no pressure at all. 1 point should cover it, right? Graydon? Actually, I'll go to Alison first. Graydon, have a think about it.
Graydon can have the final word on it.
Graydon can have the final word.
Yeah, I just think being clear with your communication, being accessible to people, and being consistent and fair in how you make decisions and address people is really important.
Amen. Thanks, Al. Graydon?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, so at the firm we've been through a very intense process in terms of trying to determine what our strategy is and the destination for the firm. And although there may be one strategy and one destination, everyone in the organisation is different and will have distinct skill sets and different roles to play. And for me, the key takeaway is to ensure that everyone knows what their role is and make it known that every role is crucial to the organisation succeeding. And back to that earlier point about consultation and communication, it's critical, I think, that conversations are had with individual team members about the importance of their role and how it contributes to their success and also ultimately the success of the organisation. Those sorts of conversations are very powerful because everyone feels a very strong sense of belonging, and that reinforces the culture of the organisation as well. It also creates the sense of worth and motivation, I think, that ensures everyone feels safe and very much inspired to bring their best to every day. Thank you, Faye.
Thanks so much, Graydon and Alison. They were such inspiring and empowering insights to close out this series. I'm so pleased to have had you both on the podcast, and I'm so grateful for your time. So everyone, that brings us to the end of our Beyond Compliance Leading Workplaces Through Change podcast series. Across these 5 episodes, we've explored both the risks facing organisations today and what it takes to lead effectively through them. The consistent theme is that great leadership is no longer just about avoiding risk, it's about building resilient, high-performing workplaces in the face of ongoing change. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. As always, please get in touch if you'd like to discuss anything we've covered in this series. You can find our details on hallandwilcox.com.au or connect with us on LinkedIn. If you've enjoyed the series, please rate, review or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
This podcast is not legal advice and should not be relied upon as such. You should always obtain legal advice about your specific circumstances.